Hello, and welcome back to the hashtag Sexy Authors podcast. My name is Mo, and today I have with me Rachel Kramer Bussel, RachelKramerBussel.com, all one word. She's the author of Craft Guide, How to Write Erotica, as well as Lap Dance Lust, a collection of erotica stories, and editor of personal essay magazine Open Secrets. She's the editor of over 70 erotica anthologies, including 10 volumes of the Best Women's Erotica of the Year series, The Big Book of Quickies, The Big Book of Orgasms, volumes 1 and 2, Come Again, Sex Toy Erotica, and more. Her anthology, Surrender, won the National Leather Association Samoa Anthology Award, and she won the 2021 National Leather Association John Preston Short Fiction Award for her short story, Necessary Roughness, in her anthology, Best Bondage Erotica of the Year, Volume 1. Rachel's essays and journalism have been published in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Glamour, Marie Claire, Salon, The Village, and many other publications. You can follow her at Raquelita, Raquelita, on X, and at Rachel Kramer Bussel, all one word, on Instagram, and subscribe to her newsletter at rachelkramerbussel.substack.com, and I'll put all those links down in the bottom. Let's give a warm welcome to Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, thank you.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, I was just thinking this as we got on the call. So I met Rachel, I guess, virtually in I want to say that was 2023, maybe late 2022 and then early 2023 when you had the your Residence 11 um Desire workshop. Is that what it was called, Desire?
Yes, I was working for this website, Residence 11, and they had an event in LA that you spoke at, right? You spoke at it?
Yes.
Because I
Yeah,
wasn't there. I was helping organize it, but I couldn't make it out there because I'm on the East Coast.
right, right. Okay, I didn't realize I thought for some reason I thought that was your company, but yes, that's how we originally met. And the conference itself was mainly romance novels, which was, something I also didn't know about. And so I just discovered though that Rachel, you write erotica. And I didn't really know that that was your specialty. So I'm really excited to have you on the air. I talk to a lot of my clients, particularly my assigned female at birth clients, my women clients, when it comes to finding ways to get aroused. I find that for those particular people, and I don't want to generalize because it's often different, but like that those stories coming to life can be extremely powerful to tapping into that arousal, tapping into our sensuality, our sexuality. It's like it's almost like an auditory version of porn because they can read it and they can imagine it.
I agree with that. And I think there's something welcoming about that kind of open space where, yes, it's something that already exists, but they can take it and, add their own spin on it or elaborate on it either in their head or if they're reading it with a partner together.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that's funny that you say that, reading it with a partner together. I find that that is also an exercise that couples enjoy to do together. I work with a lot of couples that have like desire discrepancy or they're struggling with arousal. And so erotica is one of my go-tos. And so many people are out to lunch about it. So that's another reason I'm really excited to be talking to you today um, about erotica and erotic fiction. For anyone who doesn't know what erotica is, How would you define erotica for our listeners, Rachel?
The way I define it is pretty much the dictionary definition, which is writing intended to arouse. And I like using this definition both for readers and for authors because when you hear it that way, it doesn't mean, I mean, probably yes, if you're reading erotica, there's going to be sex scenes, but that's not the only definition. And that doesn't mean that just because there's a sex scene, it's necessarily erotic. I mean, there could be a sex scene that is trying to be erotic. And of course, this is subjective and in the eye of the beholder, but just because there's a sex scene doesn't necessarily make it erotica. And also like what is a sex scene? I mean, there could be a scene where it's all dirty talk, right? And everyone's clothes are on, but the people are getting so turned on and people reading it are also getting turned on. So is that erotica? Like I would say yes.
Mhm.
And so there's all kinds of ways that you can play on the eroticism within that grouping, and really amplify whatever aspects of it you want. And I've certainly learned over the last, I guess it's 25 years of writing and editing erotica, that people have such a wide range of fantasies. And I think it's a perfect genre to explore them pretty in depth because you're getting, into your characters' heads, not just their bodies, like you're getting into the mindset of why does this particular thing turn someone on? And while I don't think it's the role of erotica to have to be sex ed, I do think you can learn about the wider world of sexuality via erotica. If you're curious, if whether, like, let's say you're curious about your own potential interest in something like BDSM or a fetish or public sex or bisexuality or whatever it is, or sex toys, anything really. I mean, I think that reading erotica, it can turn you on and open your mind, but it also, I think just the nature of it existing shows you that there are people thinking about this and writing about this and exploring this, and that you're not the only one who has these either fantasies or ideas or potential fantasies. I think that we don't really have a lot of spaces in our culture for like just using our erotic imagination, and we can be very reductive in terms of, okay, you're maybe getting off in your head while you're masturbating to like images of spanking. Well, that immediately means you want to do that. I mean, maybe it means you want to do that, but maybe it means you like thinking about it. And I don't think we really, as a culture, kind of make that differentiation very clearly. We kind of, I think, often reduce people to, okay, well, you are turned on by this, therefore you are this.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I believe erotica can give us space to kind of explore that often on our own first before we're necessarily bringing it to a partner. And it
Mhm.
can be this very welcoming, inclusive space for things that might happen in real life, and also, of course, things that either you wouldn't want to do or aren't possible, like
Mhm.
alien erotica or dinosaur erotica. I mean, there's a lot of erotica subgenres about things that are not possible either right now or ever, but
Yeah.
people are using their imaginations to fictionalize these fantasies, and really almost anything you would want to explore, you can find in erotica somewhere.
Yeah. You know what I really loved that you said, and you kind of said it right at the beginning was, that anything that arouses you is can be considered erotica, right? You said something to that effect. Um, and so I'm thinking of a lot of these, like not just romance novels, but there might be a chapter in a book that is, sexy or kinky or something. And essentially, like we get to decide like if something arouses us or not. And a lot of writing can have, it doesn't have to be what I took away from that was it doesn't have to be kinky or balls to the wall, all about
Right.
like, sex all the time in order for it to be erotica. It can be an aspect of something that you're reading. It can be an excerpt. or something like that.
And I
Right.
mean, it could be, it's something I juggle as an erotica editor because, I have room for, let's say, 20 to 25 stories, and I'm trying to appeal not necessarily to everyone, but to a pretty wide range of people, like to people who already read lots of erotica, to people who've never read it. So sometimes I'll put out a book and people will be like, oh, that doesn't go far enough, or that's not kinky enough, or that's not this enough. And
Mm,
then other people are like, that's too all those things. Um, and in a way, I think that's great because, if something is not your cup of tea, you can find something else. You can also write your own erotica. I've worked with over 800 authors who've been published in my books, and there's tons of authors just starting out now or, have started out in the last decade or so. I mean, especially post 50 Shades of Grey, especially with the rise of ebooks and audiobooks, there really isn't a barrier to getting published except, having a computer or having access to the internet.
mhm,
And I think that's enabled people to explore a lot of subgenres that might not be something that, would be like a national bestseller, but has a has an audience.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, I do think that almost any, pretty much anything you can think of could be erotic if you can make it erotic. And that's something I often encourage students to do, like to take something maybe that in real life was not a great experience, like, and I'm not talking about necessarily sexually, but like, maybe it's, being stuck in traffic and you're like, oh, this sucks that I'm 2 hours late because I'm, you know, there's, whatever, there's an accident on the road, but like maybe in your story, two people whose cars are at this standstill are like flirting with each other and maybe hooking up while they're waiting in traffic or something like that. And I
mhm.
think when you start looking at the world that way, it can just transform your day and your mind, and you can be sort of just fantasizing all the time. I mean, if you want to be. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah.
and I also think like when you said what you just said reminded me of the story I wrote that was about two women who like one sees the other through a restaurant window and they're in Paris and she's eating French fries like with a fork over this burner, and it's very sensual, and so the other woman goes in and they're talking and they're feeding each other French fries, and it's taking place in public. They're not getting naked in the restaurant, but it's about in that story anyway, it's about the buildup between them over this shared food experience. And I'm definitely I'm not saying I'm interested in only the buildup, but I think that a lot of sometimes authors like rush to the sex scene, and I think and or rush through the sex scene, and I'm always like, but wait, let's go backwards a little. Like let's build up that tension because I think the payoff when you do get to a sex scene, if it's been building up with all that tension, can be really, sexy. I mean, I think the same in real life
Yep.
often.
Yeah, teasing. The buildup is the dopamine, right? The buildup is where our dopamine spikes and we start to feel aroused. Like that's the exciting part. When you're out, you're flirting. It's the when you're reading the erotica, it's the buildup to the sex. And I agree with you. And I think that's where a lot of porn actually falls flat is they're not spending enough time on the buildup to getting to the sex. And a lot of people really thrive on that buildup. So Rachel, I'm so curious, how did you get into this work? How did you start? I mean,
I feel like erotica kind of found me. I mean, I guess I found it, but I also feel like it found me. I was in law school back in the late 90s, and that's what I thought I was going to do for a living. And I was reading a lot of erotica, and I saw a call for celebrity erotica stories for a book called Starfucker. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. And I wrote an erotic story about Monica Lewinsky, and it was basically a fantasy about me and Monica Lewinsky, and that got published. And that was really exciting. Like my name was in a book and this whole new genre because I had written a little bit, like here and there. I was in my early 20s. I'd written nonfiction, but I'd never written fiction before. And it was really exciting to just be able to dive into this world and write about, in the beginning anyway, my own fantasies, and then later branching out into pretty much fictional ones. And so I just started out doing it very much on the side, like a story here, a story there. And then someone asked me to co-edit an anthology, and then I started pitching my own anthologies, and then it kind of blossomed into I had an erotic reading series in New York, and I started teaching erotica writing workshops. And and so I've just been doing it for a very long time now. And it's not something that I set out to do, which I kind of like in retrospect. I mean, at the time I didn't know it was leading there.
Mhm.
But I've learned so much from erotica, j- just largely about the breadth of human desires and what people are into. Not that I know everything, but I've edited hundreds, if not maybe over 1,000 stories. I don't know exactly how many, but many,
Right.
many stories, and read many more to get that to that point. And so, it's definitely exposed me to far more than I ever would have been exposed to in my personal life. And I think what's really cool is that, I could be sitting at my computer all day, every day, and yes, I might write lots of varied characters, but I'd never write them as varied as the kinds of stories that, hundreds of people are writing. And I think that's really cool. And I also think that like what I publish, which are short story anthologies, I think they're really good for people who are new to erotica or are new to exploring sexuality, just like beyond whatever they've been exposed to in their
Mhm.
lives.
Like
Because I
little
think
bite
it's almost
size.
like a sampler platter. It's like you can pick and choose, and you can find things that definitely turn you on, that maybe don't turn you on, but and then other things that maybe like you're curious about or that you would like to read more about. And I also think that this is going back to what I was saying before about how sometimes we think, oh, well, you have a fantasy about being submissive. That means, you are submissive.
Mhm.
You can not be into something in your personal life and still like to read about it and get off on reading about it, or just be blown away by someone's way with words. And that might not be your thing that you want to read all the time, but you might stumble upon it and be like, wow, I didn't think that something about whatever, the foot fetish could turn me on, but in this instance, I am turned on. And I think if more people gave themselves that opportunity to read more widely, they might be surprised at what turns them on. I'm not saying anyone has to, if you're not into something, like don't read about it. But I think if you go into it with an open mind, you definitely could come across something that you would enjoy that is not necessarily what you would expect.
Yeah, I mean that, yes, for 100%. And I do love the short story anthologies. In fact, I recommended you to a couple of clients already because I think that one, it does open our mind. Like so many of my clients are just, in our culture are sex negative and of course don't realize that this even exists, something that you can read. Like everyone's familiar with porn, but that books actually exist where you can read erotic novels, um, I think is revolutionary to some people. Um, and I like the way that it does, like you talk about the imagination and sort of waking it up and people being able to sort of like tap into that lusty side of themselves that they've never really allowed themselves to do. And I think with erotica, there's definitely that avenue for a lot of people. And you mentioned 50 Shades of Grey, which is funny because it's come up before on this podcast, and I think it's because of the topic that we write, that you all write about and that we talk about. That book has to come up. And so I just want to hear what your thoughts on it as an erotica writer yourself. And I never actually read the book 50 Shades of Grey, but tell me your thoughts on that book.
I mean, I sort of have like two thoughts. Like I have an opinion on the book and the series, or the trilogy, like itself as a piece of writing, but I also think it's sort of like become its own entity beyond the specifics of the writing. So I think like it definitely could have used an editor. I don't think it's brilliant writing. It's still unclear to me exactly how it blew up because there's definitely more, um, I mean, in my opinion, well-written erotica, BDSM erotica, and also safer and just, more safe, sane, consensual, and just more realistic, but still sexy BDSM
Mhm.
books out there. At the same time, I think that book really changed the game for erotica and for so many women, especially, but also couples. I went to a luncheon, I was writing about it, where E.L. James spoke, and I will never forget, like there were, I think, I don't know, 400 people. It was a lot of people. It was out on Long Island at, I think, a country club. She came in from outside or wherever she had been. I mean, it was like Beatlemania. People were freaking out. They were so excited. A lot of women were there with their husbands. For them, it changed their marriages. It changed their sex lives. And so, whatever my opinion personally about what could have been improved in the books, like I think for them, they weren't reading it for a great masterpiece.
Right, the
They were
literary
reading it
quality
to
of it. Yeah.
unlock something like a potential in their own sexuality and their own desires that maybe they maybe they went in thinking something was missing, maybe they didn't, but like through reading this, it had a huge impact. I mean, I think that's why then we saw both more erotica available, but also like spikes in sex toy sales and more interest in BDSM. I think it introduced these concepts to people who either had never heard of them or didn't know where to get, sex toys or how to go about BDSM, safely, or what even was involved. So I think the impact of it, no pun intended, can't be underestimated. Like I think it really
Mhm.
changed a lot of things in many women's lives.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think I mean, I wish that it had then like I wish in publishing it had extended that for longer because there was sort of a brief boom of, okay, we're going to publish lots of BDSM romance and BDSM erotica, and then that kind of fizzled out. I mean, there's plenty of that still exists, but if you walk into a Barnes and Noble right now, in some ways, 20 years ago, there was more erotica on mainstream bookstore shelves. Now, I will say right now, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of romance bookstores, and a lot of them have both erotica and very sexually explicit, sometimes kinky, sometimes just erotic romance that is explicitly erotic. You can tell from the cover, there might be handcuffs on the cover, or there
Mhm.
might be, you pick it up and there's anal sex or there's threesomes. Like there's things that when I was starting out weren't as prominent. But
Mhm.
I do remember in the late 90s when I was living in New York, I would go to B. Dalton or maybe Barnes and Noble, but like I would go to these mainstream bookstores. They weren't, tiny tucked away stores. And there was an erotica section. I mean, it wasn't huge, but there were books about all kinds of erotic scenarios. And so I do think that like it's sort of a double-edged sword. Like there's more ebooks available, there's audiobooks, there's apps, there's different ways to access it now. But if we're talking about print books on bookstore shelves, it is more challenging. So like I do wish the impact of 50 Shades had maybe been more widespread. But
Lasted longer.
I think for erotica writers, a lot of them read it and thought, okay, I can do better. I'm going to put out my own stories. And then for readers, I think it really just did impact them very personally. That's something else about erotica. People aren't just reading it just for entertainment. You know, they're
It's changing their lives. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're either like turned on by it or maybe they're not turned on by it, but like people have very strong reactions to erotica. And you can see it in book reviews, but especially in audio book reviews. Like if people don't like the sound of the narrator's voice, they're not going to read it. I mean, they're not going to listen to it. Even if they think the story is sexy, like it's very much about like, is that person turning them on with their voice?
Mhm.
And so I think 50 Shades I think maybe we were just all primed for a book to do that, and that happened to be the one that did it. In a way, I think of it as sort of like Sex and the City in the way that it started these conversations, because then you were reading about and hearing on the news, things about BDSM that I don't think we had really heard before in that way. And I think it made it clear that this isn't just some very fringe thing that only a tiny percentage of people are into. Um, and I think it made it more acceptable. At the same time, I think even now you would think it's 2024, that people wouldn't be policing each other's personal lives, but I think there's still a lot of shame, a lot of fear that, okay, what if my neighbor or my friend or even my partner knew that I was turned on by this thing?
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. Yeah, I loved what you said about the author of 50 Shades, um, because despite it not being a literary, I think for a lot of people in the sex positive community, it wasn't that it wasn't just like, well written. It was more around the themes, maybe the themes around consent and the themes around,
I mean, there were definitely, aside from the writing, like issues around how BDSM was portrayed.
yeah,
I
exactly.
still
Yeah.
think it was an overall good in that it made people think about, okay, like, what do people sign BDSM contracts? Like, is this always how it happens? I think it made people who read it or heard about it like curious about, okay, is this actually something people do, or is this something she just made up?
Yeah. 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 Well, and I also heard you say that it gave women and their partners, their husbands, it gave them permission to explore something that had for a really long time has been taboo in our culture. And it sort of cracked that door open a little bit for even if it was for a short moment in time, for women to start exploring those things in their relationships.
And I did want to say, it's not just that it gave women permission to explore BDSM. I think it carved out this notion that, maybe they want to have this time just to themselves to either masturbate or just be in a sexy headspace. And then, yeah, maybe they read it with a partner or like, get handcuffs or do something explicitly from the book. Or maybe it just, especially for women who maybe are moms and like don't have a lot of time alone, or whatever their situation is. But I think because especially as it became so popular, it it became okay to say like, okay, this is my time for myself to indulge in this erotic fantasy and get swept away in it, and that is something that is just a part of my life. And I think that, that's something almost separate from, like, I think we have our sexuality that's like our own intimate personal
Mhm.
thing, and then whatever we bring to a relationship. and
Yeah.
and I think that, like, we don't I think that's not really something most people learn about in sex ed, if they get sex ed at all, right? Like, it's so often focused on what are you doing with a partner versus what are you thinking or what are you feeling like yourself. And
I
I
mean, I
think
can't tell you the
Erotica gives
number.
us a
Yeah.
chance to embrace that.
Yeah, to have a relationship with their own sexuality. I can't tell you the number of women that come into, and it is primarily women, or AFAB people. And I mean, not to say that there aren't, men and those that are assigned male at birth that also fall into this category, but that don't masturbate or don't have that relationship to sexuality that's with themselves. It's only external, like it's only in relation to someone else that they allow themselves to be sexual, and so that sexual relationship to themselves is missing. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, like it does give not just permission for, let's do this together, but like permission to have time for yourself to explore your own eroticism, and your relationship to your body and your sexuality, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna, I just want to be, conscientious of the time, but you wrote a book called How to Write Erotica. And this is a brilliant idea, because you also teach people how to write erotica. So tell me a little bit about that. Like what would somebody who was taking one of your classes get to learn about in one of your classes when it comes to writing erotica?
A lot of what I do in the classes, and this is also in the book, is talking about different kinds of scenarios that might come up. My main um, desire for people to take away from an erotic writing class is that it's less about the technical specifics of like who put what body part here. Not that you want to gloss it over that and just like skip ahead and fade to black, but like going back to what I was saying earlier, if we don't know a little bit about who they are and why this thing they're doing is turning them on, then we're not really getting as rich of an experience as we could have. Because, let's say spanking, because I've edited a bunch of books about spanking. I know a lot about it. But five people might all like being spanked, but they might all have different reasons they like it. Even if they like being spanked in the exact same way, it might be a different experience for each of them, even though if you were just watching them get spanked, it might look the same, but what's going through their mind and what is making it erotic for them might be different, depending on what experiences they bring into that situation and who's doing the spanking and how it's being conducted. So what I really want people to take away is to think about like the whole context of what's happening and also all of the senses. It's not just about like touch, it's also about sight, about smell, about hearing, about listening, about like it's not, I mean, yeah, dirty talk, I'm all for dirty talk. I think it's, I love erotica and romance with dirty talk, but someone saying your name could be dirty talk if it's done, in a sexy way, and if it's done in the right context, or maybe like you have a code word that like you say that they say the characters say that at a party or when they're out and about, and like that instantly turns someone on. I'm super fascinated by those kinds of things, and I think sometimes people go into erotica writing erotica either thinking that like they have to know everything about sex, and or that they have to have done everything that they're writing about, or that every scene has to be like super over the top, like everyone having an orgy, or like just like that you can't write about. I was gonna say like missionary position sex, not just missionary position, but just you can make anything erotic. And it could be just someone whispering into someone's ear, or it could be an orgy. I mean, I guess like I think sometimes people just assume that, okay, you're writing an orgy, it's gonna be instantly hot and readers are gonna love it. And if you could write an orgy scene that kind of falls flat if you're not, if it seems like, okay, I can't keep track of all the characters and there's too many body parts here. So I try to always bring it back to like the who, what, when, where, why, how, but especially the why, because that's the part, I mean, that's kind of my bias, but the why is the part that I think is fascinating. And I think that's also what makes it memorable to readers. If they have a character that has something unique about them that makes them in particular turned on by this scenario. And I've published some stories about things that you wouldn't necessarily think would make it into erotica, but that do, because we're sexual not just when our lives are going perfectly, or we're also sexual creatures when when we're facing illness, or you know divorce, or job loss, or whatever. And there's a story, I do not remember the author's name or which book this was published in, but it was an agoraphobia story, and it was about this woman who's agoraphobic and hasn't left her house in a very long time, and she has this partner who helps her slowly work on that and overcome that. And as part of that, that's part of their sexual journey too. And it's this very healing kind of thing, but it's also super hot. And that's not necessarily that's not an easy thing to write because you're dealing with real, mental health issues.
Health issues, yeah.
Um, but so when you're taking my classes, I think that we're learning about both like what could be an erotic scenario and also how to make an erotic story sexy for readers. And often to my students and to the authors I work with, the biggest note I give them is what are the people thinking? Because like they'll get to the sex scene and it's, this person's touching this person here and they're doing this. And I want to know, okay, like what does it feel like for them? Like what's going through their mind? How does it just more detail? Like I mean, I guess you could be too detailed, but I think a lot of times people skimp on some of the details because they think it's obvious, because maybe it is in their head,
Mhm.
obvious. But I think that like readers, they want to really feel like they're right there experiencing it with these characters.
Yeah. We want to know what's in the narrator's head. We want to know what they're thinking, what they're feeling, as well as, there's cum getting shot across the room or whatever, like that. But we want to know what's going on. That's the erotic piece of a story. So, Rachel, what would you tell someone that's interested in breaking into writing erotica? Like, what's a good place for them to start?
I think a good place to start is either with something that maybe that you've done, but you don't have to feel beholden to the actual truth because it's fiction. Like you can take the kernel of something that you did and amplify it, right? Like so maybe it was something really hot, but you wished that it had gone, this way and it went that way. Well, you can make it in your fiction go the way you wanted it to. Or you could write about something that like turns you on, but kind of maybe unnerves you a little. You're like, I don't know why I'm into this, or I don't know if I'm really into this, but I can't stop thinking about it. I think those are like good places to explore.
Mhm.
I also think you could take it out of your own head and like think about, okay, I was with this person and it was really hot. What was it like for them? And then try to picture it from their perspective and then write it from their perspective. I think that can also be really hot. And then um, a writing prompt I like to give is write an erotica story set in a familiar landmark. Now, it could be like a national landmark, but it
Mhm.
also could be, if you live in a certain city and everyone there knows this particular bar, restaurant, or, park or something, setting it somewhere that people would know. Because like if you do that and then people read it, then every time they go to that place, they're going to think of your story.
Interesting. Uh-huh. Yeah. And that brings up another topic that I'm just gonna touch on because but like the idea of having sex outside or in public spaces, that must be pretty popular in erotica.
It definitely is. And it can be tricky because, it's a fantasy that if you did it in real life, I mean, not only, might you get arrested, but like you would be
Yeah.
imposing your sexuality onto other people who might not consent. But I think like erotica can be this space where we can, explore things that in real life, you wouldn't do or you couldn't do or that just would be frowned upon. And I think like there is a reason public sex is a top fantasy of people. Well, there's lots of reasons, right? It's not the same for everyone, but I think a lot of people are curious about voyeurism and exhibitionism, which could be like outdoors in a park. It could be, in sort of semi-public, like, are you going to get caught? Aren't you? Or maybe you're doing it in front of people who are like eager voyeurs and it's sort of this mutual thing. I think that can be really fun. And I think there is something valuable in either reading and or writing about things that um that you're never going to do. And now I'm not saying people don't have public sex. Of course they do. Some people are going to do that, but most people probably aren't going to actually do that. But in erotica, like you can do all the things that cross your mind or that you fantasize about that, but that like aren't realistic in real life. You can make them, you know, you can you can bring them to life within, your fiction. And I think that like I'm not a sci-fi reader. I don't it's hard for me to picture other worlds, but there's this writer, Robin Lovett, who writes these alien erotic romances. And like when I'm reading them, I'm like, oh, like that's hot to me in the context of her, you know, the worlds that she's built, even though I'm not necessarily like the target audience for that because it's not my go-to. And I love that experience as a reader of being like sucked into a story and just discovering something about myself through my reaction to what they're writing about.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Rachel, we have an event coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about the event that you have coming up?
Yes, The Ripped Bodice is a romance bookstore that also has erotica. They have an outpost in LA and Culver City and in Brooklyn. And I'm doing a virtual book launch for Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 10, with three of the contributors, Katrina Jackson, Rebecca Chase, and SP Jaffrey. That is December 7th at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be on the Ripped Bodice Facebook page, so you can watch it live that day, December 7th, or if it's after that, you can go to the Rip Robotics Facebook page and watch the replay. So we're going to be reading excerpts from our stories and talking about erotica and our inspiration. And you can ask questions. And I always love hearing people read their stories out loud because I just think you hear it differently when they read it in their own voice.
100%. And that auditory experience, like I was kind of talking about in the beginning, is really profound for a lot of people. So, everybody, you should definitely check out that event. It's coming up on, it looks like December 7th. And I'll post all of the links down below so that you'll have access to not just the event, but to Rachel's website, as well as all of the books that she has edited and the books that she herself has also written. Thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on today and talking about this. I think it's such a profound topic, and super happy to have had you on the show today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Bye.